All right, welcome to the A/B testing session. If you're not doing it with advanced analytics, you're doing it wrong. My name is Krissy Tripp. I'm the manager of A/B testing, strategy, and analysis at Evolytics. We're a data analytics consulting agency. And I typically like to introduce myself by telling everyone how I first got my start in A/B testing. It was during an internship during my undergrad, and I was working at a manufacturing company for dental products. And my team's primary goal that summer was to build a better prophy angle. For those of you who don't know what a prophy angle is, it's the little thing that hygienists use to clean your teeth. And so I had the really, really glamorous job of cold calling hygienists and getting them to agree to do A/B tests and try out the different angles that we were producing. And then on top of that, once they did that, my job got even more glamorous because I did some manual data entry from the paper surveys that they were filling out. And no one really expected me to like this. Like, even when my boss gave me the assignment, she was like, "You're the intern. I'm really sorry about this." But I actually loved it. And the reason that I liked it is the hygienist kept writing us little notes in the margins. And back then, in 2010, there weren't a lot of great ways to use free text in analysis. But what I started doing was recording them, and I would record the rest of what the hygienist said in their quantitative survey. And I would run each little tidbit like its own little mini hypothesis statement. And I would see if what that hygienist was telling me was actually insightful, and if it could be corroborated by what the other hygienists were saying in the quantitative analysis. And I started to find stuff. I found that there were segments of hygienists. Some of them really liked the super firm rubber that you see on the black rubber, and others liked a more pliable model. And so I started segmenting, and I was super jazzed about this product, more jazzed than anyone should be about dental equipment. And I was sitting at lunch one day, and I was talking to the engineers in the tool room, and I was telling them everything I found out, how excited I was. And they were really quiet. A lot quiet. When I finally shut up to be like, what's going on? They had a ton of questions. They wanted to know more about what the hygienist said. They were like, what do they think about the ridges? Well, what about the new ergonomic stuff we added? Whose ridges won? Because the different tool makers had different cups that they were all vying for that they had produced. And I had two epiphanies in that moment. First, I realized that no one had ever given the engineers access to the customer data before. It went through this really inefficient process of, on the marketing team, there was the researcher, and so the researcher would do what I was doing, and then we would feed that up to the marketing team, who would feed that down to the product development team, who would feed that over to the engineers, and then it would finally make it to the people that were making the product. And so there was this weird, inefficient game of telephone that I didn't necessarily understand. But what I learned was the people making the product actually cared. They wanted to make a better product, and they wanted to hear from the consumers. My second epiphany was, shit, no one has ever given these people access to the data before, and I don't know how many rules I just broke. And so I immediately ran to my boss, and I told her all of the new ideas that we had for the prophy angles. And then I also came clean, and I told her how I got them and that I had messed up. And she was really forgiving. And she was forgiving because she was excited about the insights that they were able to produce. And so what I inadvertently started was collaboration at a company. The marketing team and the product development team and the engineers and the machinists started working together to tool better products. And what happened, I stayed in touch with them, this project took more than a summer, is after iterative rounds of A/B testing, they built a better product. This is 30% smaller. There's a lot of other benefits to it, but at the end of the day, what happened is dentist visits got better for millions of consumers worldwide because the prophy angle is better. And that's the crux of what I'm going to talk about today, is what can happen when teams A/B test together. And so this talk is meant for both business managers and data scientists. typically I talk more on the business side of things. Is there anyone at this conference who does say, like, I'm on the business side, I'm not a data scientist? One hand. Got one. Thank you. How many of you guys are doing A/B testing at your companies now? A couple more hands. Awesome. So I hope the rest of you find use out of this presentation. First and foremost, what we're going to talk about is how to bridge that language gap between departments, because I find that collaboration is really powerful. We're going to talk about the various business impact of applied statistical methods, because sometimes it's easier to talk about business terms of stats. And of course, we're going to talk about when you use those in A/B testing. And finally, because we're at AnacondaCon, we're going to talk about how Anaconda can support all of this. And I have a confession to make with that last part. My background is actually in SAS and SPSS. When I came to Evolytics, I very quickly embraced the open source methods, but because I do stats, I am in that tiny minority of people that use Anaconda for R. And so all of the examples I'm going to show you are built in R. But what I do have at the end, because my team is incredibly passionate that I learn Python and that we start using Python in our data science team, is I have their notes on how I should have done it, so that I can present that to you guys as well for how to use Python for more of this. And so since not many of you do A/B testing, I thought we could align around what the A/B testing process is. There's an acronym to help you remember it. It's simple. It's called IDEA. It stands for ideate, develop, execute, and analyze. You'll notice the word actionable at the bottom, and it is dark enough, I think you can see it. This is a circular fashion, and so at the end of a good A/B test, you have actionable insights, and those actionable insights feed more ideas, and the whole process continues. So let's break that down a little bit. The ideation process is crucial. And most companies, especially digital companies, they have tools like Optimizely or Adobe Target, and they start with what those tools tell them to do. I call this a risk mitigation test because it's really aligning their website onto what's a industry best practice, and they're already pretty sure the test is going to win. It's having less clicks to get to the checkout or evolving a call to action. And once they run out of those, they start thinking about how else can they generate more revenue with an A/B test. And they may talk to what I hear termed as the HIPPO, it's my favorite term, highest paid person's opinion. And so they often go to the HIPPO for what they can do to increase revenue. Or sometimes they really do have a really passionate data scientist or product manager who also has ideas. And if you test with this method, eventually you'll win. It's sort of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping what sticks, but if you do enough tests, some of your tests will win. But what I propose is using data-driven tests. We already can do a lot of advanced analysis or exploratory statistics so that we can test better. We can actually drive and inform our business stakeholders on what's going to be valuable to test. And once you have a repository of ideas, you begin to develop them. This is a little bit obvious in that you have the analytic, creative, and technical requirements of a test. But what I find is also extremely important to do is align with those stakeholders. I don't know if any of you have this from the business side, but typically the marketing teams I work with want to know every single day how their test is doing. And if you're using a frequentist method, you don't know yet because you're still collecting observations. And so I have found that to help them understand that you're not just setting it up and forgetting it, start with that. Teach them how to estimate a sample size. Tell them what their test duration is going to be and when you can expect to hear back from them, or when they can expect to hear back from you, sorry. And then also agree on what you're going to call a win. You may say the variant recipe is going to have a 5% lift and we're going to be 95% confident about it. If we don't hit that measure once we reach our sample size, we're going to call it a loss and move on. And that's important because your visitors are valuable resources. You can buy more through advertising, but you have no guarantee that that's a representative sample. And there's an opportunity cost to not running the next test. And if you've done all of this well, the execution phase is really simple. You set the test live and collect observations. I also have making the rollout decision in the execute phase. And for a lot of people, it feels like it should maybe be in the analyze phase and that would be more intuitive. But remember, we already set up those parameters. We don't have to analyze the rollout of the test. It either passed or failed. And so that takes a lot of stress off of people when they're making those data-driven decisions. It either met it or it didn't. The analyze phase is actually meant to be a lot more fun. This is where we get to dig in. This is where the data science team really comes into action because they're saying, what do the numbers say about our customers? And then you ask why. You ask why again and again and again until someone tells you you've asked why so many times you have to stop and move on to asking why about another test. And what comes out of that are more actionable insights that you can use to generate more test ideas and continue to improve and optimize your process. This has all been very general, so the next thing I want to do is walk you through a case study to make all of this feel a little bit more real. The case study we're going to talk about is a hospitality industry client, and they had a really easy question. We want everyone to stay one more day. This wasn't about increasing conversion. This was about extending the visits of everyone who was already booking a vacation. And this team was already on board with data. They already liked it, and so they had a really data-driven approach to the test. We ended up doing a multivariate with multiple A/B factors. I say the A/B part because you can have an ABN with lots and lots of factors, but they were able to parse down what they wanted to do. And so they knew that they wanted to test like 4 different value propositions, but they focused on 2. They had the control and they had the variant. And this helped us limit the multivariate into the first round of testing, really being about which factors matter so that we could really hone in on that for the next rounds. So we added new value propositioning. We added an urgency message to the website. We did a complete new redesign of the layout. And we also added an upsell flag. One of those things, it's like, book an extra day, save $50, those things. And because this was a big bet, we really needed to dot our I's, cross our T's. We did really solid experiment development in the planning phase. We ended up deciding to do a fractional factorial design with 8 recipes. We chose those really carefully. And we aligned around the KPIs. I find that a lot of teams kind of falter here, and your business stakeholders will continue to ask you questions that you're not prepared to answer because when you ask them, is this what you want to measure? They said, yep, that sounds great. And then you gave them a couple insights, and they want more, and more, and more, and more. And suddenly, you have a lot of scope creep in your test. And so they agreed. We want to understand how to extend visit length. However, we're going to track conversion because this cannot harm conversion. It has to be conversion neutral, length of stay positive. And from there, we forecasted a probable lift. Forecasting there's a lot of ways you can do it. What we had in that model was looking at what past promotions had done so that we understood how much it was normal to move. And we also looked at just average levels of variance, and we did a sensitivity analysis on that lift. And that helped us understand, okay, that bottom lift, let's call it 2% for the sake of this example, is what we want to test to. And so our sample size needs to be able to detect at least a 2% lift. And from there, we knew the sample size, and we were able to estimate the test duration. Again, this was a big bet. We decided to run it for an entire season. The execution of this was also successful. One of the first hiccups we found was in that we needed to automate these z-score and confidence interval calculations for our business stakeholder. As I mentioned, during the development phase, we set parameters. And one of the parameters we set was that we will automatically, the machine will email you if your test goes off the rails. It's really important to the business stakeholders that they know their test isn't harming the business. And so we said, if you at any point during this test have a 95 index on any recipe, you will receive an automated email. If you have a 105 index, we'll also send you an email so that you can celebrate. And so 2 weeks in, I asked her, and I was like, how many times have you cheated and checked anyway? And she said, every day. Great. So let's make it easier for you to cheat and look at your test every day. And as long as you understand that you can't make changes, keep doing this. And so what we did is we automated the z-score and the confidence level, and that allowed her to log in every single day and say, all right, this recipe is winning today. We're at 20% of our sample size, and so we're like 40% confident on that. And that allowed her to report up the food chain when she was asked and really feel like she had a pulse on how her test was doing. And so that was critical. We also identified a successful recipe, and so we understood what out of those multivariate factors would win. We also made, during the course of the experiment, an extra $650,000 in incremental revenue. And this felt like a win to everyone's boss. This was definitely the number that my boss was the most excited about. But what was really exciting is that working with this team, they cared the most about the analysis. The money to them was like just another number. It was just another data point. We shared RMD models, RMD files across the analyst team. There were 4 of us working on this. We had holdout samples and other samples to test against. We ran ANOVA, then we would rerun things with regression, and then we would, again, validate that with decision trees. So there was so much cross-validation. And the reason of that is, again, this was a big bet. It took an entire season, and they had numerous resorts participating, and so we wanted to be very sure that anything we were presenting to the marketing team was definitely a trend and that we could prove it across multiple models, and we were never at any point p-value hunting. Because when you slice and dice data a lot of ways, you introduce a lot of areas where you can have error. And so this is one of the ways that we helped reduce that. We were able to answer the most fundamental business questions. What factor matters? And in fact, the most important factor wasn't actually something we tested. It was the booking window. And that makes sense intuitively, right? The person who books their family vacation a year ahead of time is just a different human than the person who's booking their vacation for tomorrow on a whim. And so we were also able to understand how the factors varied by segment. And so this will already fuel future tests, because now that we understand what factors matter, we can segment them. And because we did this live, there was no sandbox. The data is real, it's wild, and it got messy. Because what happens is some of the resorts just start running their own promotions, and they tell you after. And so this creates problems in the data analysis, but this team actually ran with it and took it as a new opportunity. And they said, well, we have to throw it out of this test, but let's analyze it for another. Now we understand how pricing promotions add to this test, and we analyzed it like it was another factor. And after every single insight that we gave anyone on the business side, they wanted to know, how can we test that? And so this was the biggest win to me, is that a team who really had never done A/B testing before, but wanted to use data, started asking, how do we test that insight? So what are the takeaways from this example? We learned how to best increase the length of guest visits. We hit our business objective. That business objective is going to result in about a $6 million incremental revenue increase next year. Again, everyone's boss is happy. We also learned which factors increased conversion more than visit length. And so that's one of those additional insights that goes above and beyond just the test winning. Now we understand how we can manipulate conversion just as much as having people stay one more day. That's obviously going to fuel additional tests, and These insights can be applied to other lines of business. That's also a win because we know that hospitality industries sell more than just nights at a hotel. If I've done my job in the first part of the presentation, this is hopefully what you guys are all thinking. And that's what I want to explain to you in the next portion. And the answer is really simple. It goes back to that collaboration. As a consultant, I have the privilege of getting to work with multiple silos within the business. And I work with data scientists all the time who are discouraged and disheartened. And that's because they've made these really amazing models, and they have valuable ideas, and these ideas will definitely bring more revenue to the business. And everyone just feels like they're sending them into some black void. They're like, no one's listening to me. I don't know what happens. I make these reports, I make these models, they're working, and then I send them into a void that I don't know that anyone reads. And then the same thing happens when I talk to the business stakeholders. They want data. They're data hungry. And they understand that data is what's going to give them a competitive advantage over everyone else in the industry. And when they talk to me, they're like, we're investing in analytics. They're not giving us anything. And it comes down to that communication point. And so to illustrate this, I actually borrow from Anaconda. She's a best-selling author for entrepreneurs. And her takeaway is really simple. People don't buy products. They buy solutions to their problems. And that makes sense. Think about it. Who here buys Advil or Tylenol for the sake of Advil or Tylenol? You buy no more headache. It's about the solution, not the product. And I think the same thing happens with businesses who want to do testing or they want to use data. They don't want analysis. They want answers to their business problems. They want solutions to their questions. And that's what A/B testing can provide. It can make the analysis actionable, and it can work in a really circular fashion to fuel more analysis. And so these are my top 5 most common ways that I use applied statistics in A/B testing that's above and beyond what someone gets out of their average digital testing tool. The first one is a proportions test. I call it the MVP because you run it for literally everything. This goes back to helping people understand their sample size estimates and how long a test is going to take to run. The common business questions that go with that are, how long is it going to take me to reach statistical significance? And then I answer, and usually it's, okay, but my lift is going to be better than you're projecting. What if my lift is better? And then after that, okay, realistically, I can run my test through May. So what kind of lift do I need to see to be confident about my test that's going to run through May? Okay, that's unrealistic. How confident can I be if I run my test through June and assume a 5% lift? And so it's almost like people are bargaining with the numbers, right? And this is inefficient. It's inefficient for a couple of reasons. One, this stakeholder is frustrated. They don't necessarily understand the math because they're trying to bargain with it. But this test, it doesn't have any data. It takes me maybe a second to run, so it takes that stakeholder longer to send me this email than it takes for me to get them an answer. So what we did is we built a GUI. This is built in Tableau, and I did talk to the people outside. PyViz can do all of this, but this is a Tableau version, and we have it sitting on top of our customers' clickstream data so that they also don't have to calculate their historical traffic or their historical conversion. And so what happens is you say, I want to test on this site. This is the product I would like to optimize. This is my conversion metric. And you can see that it spits out your historical conversion rate, and they can test how long it's going to take them to do their test. They can enter the parameters on their own. And this helped with a lot of buy-in because stakeholders could see from themselves like how to manipulate the formula, and they felt like they were doing it themselves rather than getting the answer they didn't want. The other thing that we do surprisingly commonly is principal components analysis. And your first question should definitely be, what does principal components analysis have to do with A/B testing? And what I find is really common is that people have more data than they know what to do with. And there's a reason there's a dog photo here. The principal components analysis that I just showed you was actually for a builder case study. It's for a steel manufacturer that partners with builders. But I kind of think it's a little bit of a boring case study, and pictures of builders aren't nearly as cute as dog photos. And so I'm going to walk through this case study as if I'm selling really fancy dog food. And the reason we're doing this case study is that my dog food sells exclusively into dog food stores. And in order for them to not sell my dog food next to my competitors, I've also agreed that they will be my only channel for a certain geolocation. This was a real client. One of the issues they faced is that they had area managers entering 300 data points about those dog food stores and Salesforce. Does anyone here think that the area manager accurately entered 300 data points? No. So either you're asleep or you agree with me that that was unrealistic. And they agreed that it was unrealistic too. And so they're like, we want to get it down to 10. And then we want to test which of those 10 factors actually matter so that we can continue to optimize this process and predict which stores that we should continue to partner with. And so we did a PCA. And from there, they wanted to understand, is there a better way that we can segment our customers? And the data scientists working on this project said, right now we're using t-shirt sizes. Surely there's something better than small, medium, and large to segment by. And so the PCA kind of helped us find those underlying factors that made those stores different from one another so that they didn't just have to go on their size. And then they wanted to understand the motivations of the consumers. PCAs are also really great at that. And if anyone is ever struggling to make use of survey data or voice of the customer data, this is a great way to start testing that because it can help you, again, understand when you have a lot of data, how to make it smaller, and then you can start testing against those underlying factors. It usually helps you get to a cluster analysis. This one's actually really easy to explain on the business side of things because it's just segmentation. This case study was done for a gift manufacturer, and they were looking for someone named Maria. Maria was their ideal customer. This client was a little bit new to data, and so Maria was made on a qualitative dream of what their ideal customer should be. And they came to us and they were like, can you help us make this more data driven so that we know it's real? And so they primarily wanted to know what gift buying segments exist in the marketplace. Just help us identify our segments. And I really like this study because we found 3 segments of gift buyers. And the best part of this is that it's regardless of income. And so when we controlled for income, we found that it doesn't matter to this. There is a gift buying segment that thinks gifts are too expensive, they're a necessary evil, and they don't want to do it. They really don't want to buy presents for anybody. And there's also people who they will buy the gift, and they kind of enjoy it, but somehow it's like a little bit all about them. This is the person who will buy you the most expensive bottle of wine so that you think it presents them in the highest light. And then there's a third group, and this third group really loves buying gifts. In fact, gifting is their love language. It's how they show people they care, and it's how they show everyone they care. They're buying their hairstylist and their child's teacher Christmas gifts because that's how they show them that they're special and meaningful to them. They also wanted to know which quantitative data-driven segment more closely aligned with that qualitative consumer that they created as their ideal buyer. You can probably guess which one that was, but then they wanted to know how they use that to test. And so one of the things we did was we helped them identify that consumer in the marketplace. We used a decision tree, and we were able to, with only one survey question, identify their consumer with 70% accuracy. And so with one question, they could identify if they were speaking to Maria or not, and they could test their product development that way. This was incredibly important because it was a product development team that wanted to understand more about their consumer. And so the fact that they could now test their actual consumer and not everyone in the marketplace who doesn't want to buy gifts anyway was really crucial to them being more successful more quickly. And they began to leverage those segments to drive strategy. And segmentation is important in testing because as people continue to optimize to kind of that macro audience, we're running out of things that everyone likes. And there's a point of diminishing returns when your product or your website is going to reach a plateau. And so rather than looking at how we can improve things a little bit for a lot of people, you can use segmentation to improve things a lot for a few people. I have hazard analysis, but really this is any time series. And this is beneficial in testing because a lot of digital customers, they want to do omni-channel marketing, and they want to be able to track people across that holistic customer journey. And we even have some really advanced customers who are able to connect offline data to their online data and see if you researched something online and then bought it in the store. And so what you're able to do with time series is you're able to kind of test pieces in that puzzle of the customer journey and understand how they impacted the customer down the line. And so what I have here, because I really love segmentation, is a segmented time series analysis. And that got us to a couple questions. What we're proving with this is that loyalty signups are valuable. That feels really intuitive. But it was meaningful because it allowed us to test how we could encourage more loyalty signups. So simple insight, simple test. And we were able to do that successfully. But the next question was, is it more cost effective to retarget loyalty members who are already likely to buy, or should we invest our dollars in targeting those consumers who aren't as likely to buy, but they have a ton of room for improvement? And so we were able to test things across the channel to find the most cost-effective way to do both. And also for visualization, you don't have to make this segments. You can make this your recipes. And so they gave me a fancy laser pointer. If instead of loyalty customers, this was your B variant, showing this to your business stakeholder would make it really obvious that they should roll out the test. And so that's another way that you can use this, especially if you're doing omni-channel testing. And we know that not everyone converts on the same visit. It may take a couple visits. And so that can be really powerful to kind of see how the test is affecting things downstream. Finally, this is the last one. If anyone is counting, this is number 5, is regression analysis. And I'm sure that I don't have to argue how awesome regression analysis is in this room, but it's really valuable for testing and for getting into that advanced analysis. It can help answer or further everything we've looked at so far. So which factor from the dog food test were the most profitable? We can help answer that with regression. What gift will my Secret Santa recipient be super stoked about? Regression can also help us predict that and score potential gifts on how happy they'll make someone. Which marketing channel should I invest in? And what's the dollar value of each in-app action? This is another thing I'm just finding as an industry trend. Again, we know that not everyone converts for every visit. And so a lot of brands are investing in content strategy or allowing people to kind of go through that dream phase, but they kind of need to back that up somehow. And so with regression, they can say, you know, we got 100 people to sign up for our email newsletter today, and that's valuable. And here's why that's valuable, and here's what that dollar value is. And so it is definitely not a vanity metric, and we should continue to test these micro conversions and see how we can increase them. As promised, these were our examples, which Anaconda does have, but I work with a really brilliant team who is passionate about Anaconda and is passionate about Python, and that is a large reason why they really wanted me to come here. And so we've already implemented a lot of these, but their favorites were Jupyter Notebook, Pandas, NumPy, SciPy, and stats models for doing all of these things. So that does wrap up my presentation.